Well, earlier I spoke with Ivor Ichikowitz, whose foundation commissioned the survey. He's the founder and executive chairman of the Ichikowitz Family Foundation. And I started off by asking him about why he says this is a wake-up call for skeptics.
Rhetoric on this has been very, very controversial because there are many people that still talk of Africa as the dark continent. They still talk of Africa as a hopeless case. Images of Africa are about starving children. Nobody sees hope, nobody sees optimism, and we've always seen it exactly the opposite way. And I wanted to put some science behind this sense, this instinct that we had that this continent is going through a transformation and that there really is hope, optimism, and a bright future for the continent. And we took a huge risk in doing the survey because we didn't know what the results would be. And we have been extremely vindicated, and I'm very excited to say that we really have found a continent that is truly filled with optimism and hope, especially in this generation. This is the first generation of Africans, 18 to 24-year-olds, who have never experienced colonialism, who've never experienced apartheid, who've never experienced extreme oppression. And this comes out in their hopes and aspirations and in the positive energy that we're getting out of the results of the survey.
Talk about what really stood out to you, not just in terms of the overall findings, but also in how Africans who are so young see themselves right now.
They are in a space where they're connected to the world. There's a sense of connectedness to the global society, to the global economy that I don't think has ever been seen before on the continent. There's also a sense of capability. You know, in the past, there's been a tendency for Africans to wait for other people to come and solve their problems. We're seeing exactly the opposite today. This is a generation who believe that they have their future in their own hands, that they have the power and the capability to go and create their tomorrow the way they want to see it. It's also a generation who believes in democracy. It's a generation who believe in having a say, so the principles of democracy, but not necessarily democracy as the West see it. So almost split right down the middle. Half the population want to see a Western-style democracy, and the other half of the population want to see stable, autocratic, long-term leadership. So what it tells us is this is a generation that wants an African style of democracy, not necessarily a Western-style democracy. And a lot more information of this nature, which is going to help policymakers, help decision makers to think better about what an Africa of tomorrow should look like.
We know that access to reliable technology and connectivity are really key to pushing the continent forward. How does one unlock that and make that happen? Obviously, you need consistent power to be able to run a business and push your ideas forward.
So the mobile generation has truly created a revolution on the continent. A very significant number of the people surveyed here are connected, irrespective of whether they're living in a very impoverished rural environment or they're living in an urban environment. And that comes out in the way that they see the world. This is a generation that does see themselves as being properly connected to the rest of the global community. So connectivity is considered by most people in this demographic as a human right. The same way as they see access to water and access to electricity, they see access to the internet as a basic human right. And what's happened in Africa over the last few years is a lot of innovation has been created to provide connectivity despite the lack of access to regular electricity. People have found very innovative ways to make sure that they have access to their smartphones, that cell phone towers operate using solar power, that there's solar power available to charge devices. And even in the most rural areas, the survey is telling us that people use their devices and are connected and are engaging with the information that they're getting out of their devices. It also shows us that an overwhelming majority of people consume their news through social media.
Now, obviously, for these companies or these people with ideas that want to make them really multinational and go beyond their borders, how can the continent better promote talented young people to create on the continent and also become major exporters of finished products?
So industrialization in Africa is not optional. There is no question that the future of the continent is going to depend on harnessing our human capital. The greatest asset on the continent is human capital. In the next 50 years, 40% of the available labor force in the world is going to be on the African continent. So policymakers today, decision makers today, need to pay very serious attention to creating value-add opportunities, industrial opportunities on the continent. And here is a generation of people that actually want to put in the work to make that possible. But what is required is an enabling environment that comes from the international community, that comes from governments, that comes from the banking institution to create capital that makes industrialization both viable and achievable. And this can absolutely be done, but there's been a part of the rhetoric in the past is that Africans don't want to work, they don't want to add value to their to their raw materials, and therefore they're opening themselves to being taken advantage of. Well, that is not the case. This demographic is saying we are not going to put up with that anymore. We are going to add value to our raw materials. We're going to create industrial societies. We're going to ensure that we add value, and we're going to make sure that we get our share of the revenue that's being generated by our continent. We're not going to be exploited anymore. And this message is coming out very, very strongly through the people that have been surveyed.